Well, I don't know what it's like for you guys, but where I am, the weather is incredible at the moment. It is giving me huge flashbacks of 5 years ago when actually lockdown first began. And I was incredibly jealous that I was classed as a key worker. So having to go in, do prescription animal meds, animal feed, fencing, and not get to sit in my garden like a lot of my friends who are on furlough. So I just want to think, what were you guys doing 5 years ago when all of that was kicking off?
I was one of those people that got a lockdown puppy, which was a bit of an issue at the time, wasn't it? But I'm pleased to say he's come out the other side really well.
As for me, I was getting kicked out of uni thinking I'd take half my stuff home and be back in 4 weeks' time. But alas, I was not. But I was also in the key worker boat, working on the next door hop farm, getting that tan in and actually enjoying myself, really.
How about you, Producer Martin?
I was reading news bulletins that were very repetitive, that just kept saying, COVID is here, it's still here. Here's Prime Minister Boris to give you the latest. So, yeah.
Next slide, please.
Exactly.
Hi, I'm Tom Spencer and welcome to Agonomics.
With David Udall.
Although this week it doesn't actually feature David, so maybe we should just agree to call it Agonomics?
Makes sense. That's 3 presenters for the price of 1.
I'm Hannah Clarke. I specialise in red meat markets at AHDB.
I'm Charlotte Forkes-Rees, and I'm brimming with the insights into consumer behaviours.
And as for me, I bring, well, a little bit of this, a little bit of that.
Yeah, we were struggling to think of what value you added, Tom.
Oh, harsh.
Joking aside, this week we're going to focus on the pork industry, something that I've written recently, looking at the challenges it's faced over the last 5 years post-Brexit.
Yeah, a lot has happened across the world in that time, hasn't it? And it seems fair to say that there are few individuals, industries or economies who've escaped the impact of the COVID pandemic.
All felt the knock-on effects of increased geopolitical tensions that have led to conflicts.
And don't forget the elections of the major governments around the world.
Yeah, so plenty to talk about then.
Please follow and subscribe to this show wherever you stream your podcasts.
New shows drop at midday on Wednesdays.
And please do get in touch with us. Comment on any of HDB's social channels or send us an email.
Agonomics@ahdb.org.uk. Tom, so you mentioned that you were going to be bringing a bit of this, bit of that, a bit of the magic to today's episode. I mean, how did it come about, the recent report that you wrote looking back at the pork industry and the challenges that has really faced over the last 5 years?
Yes, very, very good question, Charlotte. Yeah, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. One of those things is the pork markets. So we at HDB get a number of requests all the time. Lots of our stakeholders and our levy payers asking us lots of questions. And one that came across our email inboxes was to do with a little bit of a story and what has happened to the pork industry since Brexit, since 2020. So a look back of the last 5 years.
Sounds great. I mean, when I first started here, and that was like 2022, I kind of was smack down in the middle of everything. It felt like kicking off a little bit. So actually, for me, it's going to be really interesting to hear what you've got to say, looking back that little bit further about what sort of the events were that led up to some quite difficult years for the pork industry, really, wasn't it, Hannah? I know I was in the red meat team with you at that point, and it did seem that it was, it felt like a little bit of crisis after crisis, but hopefully we're at a turning point, I guess.
Yeah, we had that sort of perfect combination, that storm of Brexit and the various deadlines of that came and went and came and went. And then we had COVID, and it's really difficult to I guess, unpick exactly what has affected the market and in what way. I mean, every sector was affected, but for pig meat, there was particularly a lot of issues going on at the time.
Yeah, if we pinpoint a sort of first topic to look at, when we look at, maybe it was a combination of Brexit and COVID, but those labour shortages and workforce challenges were definitely a key impact on the industry. When we look at the UK meat processor sector, they saw employment in the industry decline at an average annual rate of 3.5% between 2019 and 2024, and that's averaged over that with some key points there that were pretty significant. Those persistent vacancies highlight that sort of ongoing workforce challenges within the wider meat processing sector, but was definitely felt by the pork industry for sure.
And what was kind of causing those year-on-year decreases? Because that seems like quite a lot, doesn't it, to be losing in the workforce?
Yeah, you've got that mix between impacts of COVID, making it harder, the process of employing new people, getting them up to speed, and the number of people that you're actually able to have in those factories, but also Brexit and EU workers trying to get them to fill roles. It became sort of almost a bottleneck with those two together in trying to employ those two, almost created this sort of perfect storm, as Hannah alluded to. In terms of effects of that, where we can see the impact of the processing sector being affected. So I created this graph. So we've got UK imports of boneless versus bone-in pork. So your bone-in pork is your sort of less processed cut of meat, and your boneless cut being your more processed meat. So when we look at those imports, the UK imported from the EU a significant amount less of bone-in pork, basically because we didn't have in the UK a capacity to process it ourselves. So we were sort of making use of the EU side of things to be able to do that for us. So that a significant drop between sort of 2021 was the sort of big year that it properly declined, but 39% is what it fell from 2019 to 2024. So that was 232,000 tons of bone-in pork, all the way down to 141,000. So yeah, a big effect when we look at those trends.
A huge drop. And I mean, out of interest, from my point of view, some of the work that we do is looking at pork country of origin in retailers and assessing facing. So that's the number of products horizontally on a shelf, and looking at the origins that are British. So if you're saying that we saw a decrease in, what was it, bone-in coming in, was there an increase coming through then of boneless, or was it, not actually that we were importing more? What was kind of going on there balance wise? Because we haven't seen that coming through, or we hadn't been seeing that coming through so much in the country of origin results from retail point of view.
The boneless side of things didn't have too much of an effect, suggesting that it was simply the place that it was processed was changed to the EU, having that sort of impact of that workforce decline.
So I mean, we've talked about a lot of challenges and change, I guess, on the import side of things, and we're also exports are also really important to the pig meat market for things like balancing the carcass. So shipping those products that the domestic consumer doesn't want. So things like offal are really important to the sector. What did your report sort of pick out on the export side of things and how that's changed over the last 5 years?
It's that direct relationship between the EU and the UK, EU being our biggest market when it comes to export of pork. And that post-2019, post-2020 drop-off was significant. So the total EU imports, that's the amount that the EU is importing from the UK, almost sort of dropped off a cliff. You were looking at around about 120,000 tonnes, 130,000 tonnes in 2019, 2020, and that dropped off a cliff to 2021 that went down to 69,000 tonnes, and it's remained around that same level. It's now 63,000 tonnes in 2024, which did give us sort of an opportunity to find new partners, such as sort of Mexico and Vietnam, but that's definitely sort of a less value product, the offal type market that we were accessing in terms of a non-EU market.
I was going to say, if it dropped off a cliff like that, it kind of makes it feel like there were a lot of barriers getting put in place to perhaps getting our product out. Would that be a correct assumption?
Definitely. I think that first year specifically, that transition period in 2020 was that sort of immediate impact. The movement of goods has been sort of more cumbersome and costly since then. Products have faced sort of delays, increased paperwork requirements at the border, and that's what you'd expect when we left the single market out of the EU.
We've talked a lot about the challenges that the sector's faced over the last 5 years. I wondered if what we've seen in terms of opportunity, thinking positively, What have we seen in the industry that's been a positive effect, if any, of the various phenomenons we've seen over the last 5 years?
The UK's departure from the European Union has enabled us to negotiate free trade agreements. So specifically, we talk about the UK joining the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. I know it's a bit of a mouthful, so the CPTPP, as it's now abbreviated to. This will help develop more trade agreements and markets beyond the EU, and hopefully into the future will feel a bit more of an effect. But at the minute, it is particularly reduced. But specifically, when we look at somewhere like Mexico, we've now removed a 20% tariff on UK pork exports to Mexico. So developing of those trade agreements and exports will hopefully see a future market that we can see grow.
You might not have included this within the report, but just thinking, I mean, was it last week that David was talking to Sarah about impact of tariffs and trade agreements that are going on, perhaps with things that are happening in America? I mean, is that going to have quite an impact, do you think, on that exploration of new markets with things going on? Or
that's another question, Charlotte.
It is the hot topic, Charlotte. Don't worry. Everyone seems to be talking about it. And I think from my point of view, we're still waiting for that dust to settle on what it will impact. Because, of course, when you look at a country's trade between another country, it isn't as simple as that. There's a lot of cogs turning about countries trading with the rest of the globe, and a reduction of trade from country X might increase an amount of trade with country Y. So when we're looking at what President Trump has been doing over the past month or so, it is a tricky one to predict, but I'm sure as the dust settles, we'll be able to really take hold of that on a specific case in terms of what its impact is for the pork industry, and we can update you further, really, because it's quite an exciting time to be analysing these sort of things.
Our pork market expert, Freya Shuttleworth, has actually done some analysis on this, which you can go and read on the website as well. But as you say, it's a massively evolving picture. I mean, it's changing by the day, it seems, at the minute. So as and when we know more, our listeners will be the first to know.
I think that's a good time to go to our market update.
Hi, I'm Tom Spencer, analyst at AHDB, with a look at beef and lamb markets for the week ending 19th of April. Deadweight cattle prices continued to climb, although at a steadier pace, with the all-prime average reaching the magic number £7 per kilo. Retail promotions over Easter likely helped keep beef demand strong. Meanwhile, cattle slaughter numbers dipped, likely due to the bank holiday, and cow prices edged up too. On the sheep side, deadweight lamb prices eased slightly to 703 pence per kilo. Supply remains higher than last year, but demand is still a bit subdued. Although fewer sheep were processed last week because of the holidays, overall numbers stayed strong, supported by a carryover of hogs. Export markets have helped steady things, and more new season lambs are beginning to come through. For more updates, head to ahdb.org.uk and click on Markets and Prices.
AHDB's Planting and Variety Survey delivers UK planted area estimates for the upcoming harvest each year. The results offer an early idea of what might be available for the upcoming UK cereals and oilseed rape harvest, and this year will reflect the impact of what was a challenging autumn for many. But we can only do this with your help. If you're a UK grower, please take a moment to complete the crop and variety form for Harvest 2025. You may have received the survey through the post, in which case please complete and return it by Monday the 12th of May. Alternatively, you can fill in a form online. Just go to ahdb.org.uk/PVS25 and ensure it's submitted by Friday the 16th of May. The survey is open now and results will be available on the AHDB website from the 10th of June. Thank you for your input.
So welcome back to Agonomics, and you may be slightly confused if you missed the first part of this episode. This is not David Udall, this is Hannah Clarke, and I'm joined by my esteemed colleagues Charlotte Forkes-Rees and Tom Spencer, and we are talking about the UK pork sector, and 5 years on from, well, several things: Brexit, COVID, more recently the Ukraine war, and we're just summing up really how all those things have affected the market and where we are now, really. So just a small topic of conversation. Tom, we spoke earlier about the impacts on trade and the impacts on labour and things like that. The other element of the market that's really important is, of course, domestic production and the cost of producing pork. What did we sort of see over the last 5 years, I guess, and the impact on cost of production for pig meat. Obviously, one of the main impacts on that element of the market was the Ukraine-Russia conflict, which is still ongoing. What were the key impacts on cost of production that we've seen over the last 5 years?
Yeah, it's a big moment for UK agriculture and world agriculture, I think. But when we look at the impacts on the pork sector specifically, the key difference with pork compared to other livestock and meat production is its reliance on feed. So 65% of GB pig cost production is feed. So when you see those huge spikes that we saw as Russia went to war with Ukraine in the cost of wheat and barley, maize, etc., that significantly impacted cost of production. So to put that into numbers, the net margin per pig, pig producers on average were losing £58 a head, which when you add that together with sort of the higher inflation that we were experiencing, the interest rates and pig producers finding it harder to finance expansion, variable cost components with sort of energy, veterinary medicine, building maintenance, it was, again, another perfect storm and something that a lot of pig producers ended up leaving the market.
I'd say that sounds like it could be absolutely catastrophic, for your livelihood, because it's things that you can't even control. These are things that are being forced on and happening to you. I can't even imagine having all those changes and things impacting you. You literally can't do anything about them.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say the industry showed a lot of resilience during that time, and it was tough for a lot of people.
You're so right, Hannah. When you compound that with the labour shortages that we've talked about, the processing delays because of the lack of labour within processing units, that oversupply in the domestic market, and then you add to the fact that it was just very costly to produce pigs, this sharp decline in pig prices compounding the financial strain on producers, it was extremely tough. And I know. You, if you're outside of farming, you might hear farmers complain, but this was every farmer knew about what was happening to the pig industry.
Has it recovered? Can there be a good news story that comes from this? It would be nice if our British pig farmers could be having a good news story at the moment. Is that the case?
I'd like to say yes. I was at Pig and Poultry. That's an event that happened last year, happens every 2 years. And the sentiment seemed to be a lot better, I think. And now we've got stats in front of us. The last sort of 18 months, there has been a positive net margin. So having gone from losing £58 per head, now the industry's in a much better position, again, relative, looking at sort of 18 to £20 net margin per head. So much more positive, and something that every farmer is pleased to hear. Absolutely.
And actually, is there potential that it may improve? I mean, here's me talking again with my retail head. There's potential supply issues. Am I correct in saying, Hannah, with beef? With, global supply, domestic supply. We've got avian flu potentially impacting our poultry sector. So not saying that pork, is going to be wishing any of these things, but actually, is there the potential that they can be there to fill, demand shortfalls in retailers, perhaps, with supplying pork products? Would that help with boosting margins per head, do you think?
I mean, anything that boosts demand, and it was something I was going to ask you a bit more about, Charlotte, actually, was what we saw for demand for pig meat. And it's slightly outside of the scope of your report, Tom, but it'd be interesting just to chat about what we saw with demand for pig meat and what consumers were buying through that time, because all those things that affected the market, so COVID, Brexit, etc., they also affected consumers, didn't they?
Hugely.
So
if you look at a consumer confidence graph, which we get sort of quarterly, you can see the dips in confidence completely coincide with when there's an election, cost of living crisis starts, when war in Ukraine happened, anything that could potentially be impacting on how much money a consumer is going to be having that they can spend, you see that confidence dips. So definitely, throughout all of those periods that Tom's talked about, we've seen declines there. Unfortunately, we also saw through some of this period, particularly when I joined the team, was that we were seeing that pork was losing out a little bit through something we called switching. So it was losing out to other proteins, notably your beefs and your chicken. So it was either that people were potentially looking that they needed to make cost savings. So not necessarily going, oh, I'm going to go and buy myself a whole chicken. It was actually, I need to save a little bit more money and go for your thighs, your wings, your legs. Or they're going, actually, I fancy treating myself a little bit and I'm going to look at beef and what cuts within there that I can potentially look to move into. But what I would say is actually really encouragingly over the most recent 12-week data, we have seen that pork has come back into growth. So we have seen a 0.3% increase in volumes being purchased, and that's through things like sausages. So they're doing really well. And I'm hoping that actually we haven't got the Easter data just yet, but Easter was cracking this year in terms of weather, wasn't it?
It was.
Absolutely.
Got sunburnt in the garden, having a pizza oven in the garden. So I know, totally not on brand. There might have been some cured products on them, and there was definitely dairy with cheese. But what we might be seeing is that actually were people going to be going for your barbecue type products, so your sausages, your burgers doing really well, more breakfasts in bed, those lazy brunches, because Easter is definitely a time where you'd have an in-home celebration. So I'm hoping that the tide is going to hopefully start turning for pork. And coming back into a little bit of growth for consumers.
Yeah, and I wonder how much of an impact do you think, because obviously the beef price has rocketed since the start of this year, and we are seeing increase in price of beef at retail, and lamb is traditionally quite expensive. So do you think that is having much of an effect on pork consumption, or might have an effect on pork consumption?
Yeah, I mean, that is something that we are going to be looking into, hopefully, over the next couple of months. And it's this thing called price elasticity. So at what point is there a threshold that your consumer's going, actually, as much as I want to be buying this beef product, I don't want to be paying that price. So I might look for another product to fill that gap. And actually, that is when pork could be really well placed. So of the red meats, it is the cheapest price per kilo. It is really good for taste. It is really good for health metrics, particularly with your vitamin B12. And actually, are we going to start seeing your price on chicken, which is the cheaper of the proteins, coming up and rivaling that of pork? So people are going to be going, actually, I'm not saving anything by buying that chicken product. I might look to have that pork product. So that is definitely something that we might start seeing. And it is something that we are going to be looking into, hopefully, over the next few months.
So, past 5 years, we've seen a lot of turbulence, but I'm very glad to hear a bit of silver lining for both agriculture from a production side, but also when it comes to the supermarket shelf. If you want to find any of the information we've been talking about today, please do go ahead and visit our website, ahdb.org.uk. And if you've got any ideas for any topics you want us to be covering or any questions about economics in general, please email us, agonomics@ahdb.org.uk. So thank you both. This has been really enjoyable. I hope David wasn't too disheartened with us hijacking his podcast. I thoroughly enjoyed myself. I don't know about you two.
Yeah, we're definitely going to have to compare ratings on one of David's episodes and this episode and see who has come out on top.
I'm going to go and sunbathe in my garden now. It's been great chatting with you. I'm going to go enjoy the sunshine.
And I'm going to go and play with my lockdown puppy, who is now a 5-year-old dog.